Hey everybody, Joe Rignola here, back with part 4 in what I'm calling the whole body series. I'm just giving you an example of how everything in the body is connected, and that you shouldn't just treat one little part of the body without, taking a look at the whole system and treating it in a more sort of holistic way. So I talked about glucose and insulin resistance and fat tissue and leptin and metabolism and cholesterol and hormones, and just give you an example of how all of those things are connected. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about hormones. So in the last video, we talked about how in order for these hormones, these steroidal hormones to be made, like estrogen, testosterone, DHA, cortisol, and so on, among other things, we need cholesterol and we need thyroid. And so, of course, we talked about how if your thyroid is suppressed, we're going to have trouble making some of these hormones. And so I want to go a little bit deeper into that today. So let's pick out one of these hormones. Let's talk a little bit about cortisol. And if cortisol isn't being made, we're going to have some issues. So you may already know that cortisol is our main stress hormone. It's also our waking hormone. It should be most active first thing in the morning. It's one of the things that really wakes us up. But another thing that cortisol does is it's our main anti-inflammatory hormone. It's a very powerful anti-inflammatory. And so if you're like most people and you've got some inflammation, and then you end up with a situation where your body's not making enough cortisol, then inflammation is going to be it's going to go unchecked. It's going to become sort of out of control. And now we're back at square one, right? We talked about how inflammation is one of the main causes of insulin resistance, and it's one of the main things that blocks leptin, the signal of leptin that getting into the brain, so you end up with leptin resistance. And so this vicious cycle that goes on and on and on and on. And so we, again, we end up with this situation where we're storing a little bit more fat than we necessarily need. So let's talk about something else that this adipose or this fat tissue does. It produces another hormone called aromatase. Aromatase. And the job of aromatase, did I spell it right? Yeah, I think so. The job of aromatase is to convert androgens, in other words, testosterone, into estrogen. Now, a little bit of that is normal and perfectly fine, but obviously too much of that is going to cause some problems. Whether you're male or female, you don't want to be estrogen dominant. But it's particularly problematic, obviously, if you're a guy, you don't want to be estrogen dominant. So if you're storing a little bit more fat than you necessarily need, or a lot more than you necessarily need, you're going to be making more aromatase, and that's potentially going to set you up to convert too much testosterone into estrogen. Now, what are some of the things that estrogen can do? Estrogen is seen, excess estrogen is seen as toxic to the body, and one of the ways that it tries to protect you is it wraps it in these fat cells, ironically. So you've got this estrogen wrapped in these fat cells, and it's one of the ways that the body tries to protect you from it. So now the body's going to be a little bit more reluctant to lose some of this fat because it's trying to protect you from this free estrogen that's going to, from roaming around in your blood. One of the other things that estrogen can do is it can downregulate thyroid. It can block the conversion of T4 into T3, which is your active thyroid, suppressing your metabolism even more. And so, again, we've got this vicious cycle going on. What else is going to happen if your metabolism, your thyroid, is suppressed? We talked about a few things so far, but what else is going to happen if that thyroid is suppressed? It's going to slow down your metabolism, and it's going to slow down your elimination. So you're going to have poop stored in your large intestine longer than it should. So now here's where things get a little bit more interesting. One of the ways that the body detoxifies excess estrogen, say that 10 times fast, excess estrogen, is from the liver. So the liver's job, one of the jobs, is to secrete that estrogen in bile into the digestive system. And so what do you think is going to happen if you've got that poop sitting in your large intestine longer than it should? Then your body's going to start to reabsorb some of that estrogen and put it back into the blood system. And again, now you've got, this another vicious cycle of excess estrogen, suppressed thyroid, slow down digestion, reabsorption of estrogen, and it just goes on and on and on. So let's talk about testosterone now. And I see this a lot, and more lately. Go to the doctor and your testosterone is low, and some of the symptoms from that are obvious. The most obvious one is reduce libido, but it could also lead to, fatigue and depression. It's implicated in bone health and obviously in muscle health and building muscle. And so if your testosterone is low, then you're going to be suffering from a number of symptoms. So you go to the doctor, it's, doc, I don't feel right, they run a blood test. Lo and behold, your testosterone is low. Who knows why? It could be slow down metabolism. It could be that the cholesterol is not getting into the cell. It could be signaling from the hypothalamus pituitary for some reason, something wrong with that signaling, which could be inflammation or who knows what else. So whatever reason your testosterone is low, and of course the doc's going to say, hey, no problem, we'll put you on some testosterone cream, you'll feel good as new, you'll feel like, a 22-year-old kid again. And you start using the testosterone cream, and sure enough, you feel better for a while. What happens is, you start to go back into not feeling quite as well again, and you say, Doc, I don't know what's happening, I don't feel so good. It was great in the beginning, but I'm starting to feel like crap again. So the doc says, well, no problem, we'll just give you more testosterone. So what do you think's happening here? We're not really treating the issue. We've got some excess fat storage, we've got slow metabolism, we've got slow digestion, we've got remember the LDL receptors that if they're downregulated, then that cholesterol is not getting into the cells where it's needed to do all of these functions. So there's so much more going on, and just treating it with a testosterone cream, again, is treating an end result of a much broader, much bigger issue. So the problem with that is a couple of things. We know if we've got excess adipose tissue, we're making aromatase, and so if we're putting testosterone into the system, a lot of that, or even most of it, is going to get converted into estrogen, and that's going to continue this cycle. Another thing that just taking testosterone is, remember I just said before that the hypothalamus is going to send a signal to the gonads telling it to make these hormones, so in this case testosterone. What this does is it's going to sense hormones. It's going to sense how much of a hormone is in the blood, and it's going to send a signal to the body to either upregulate or downregulate that particular hormone. So in this case, we're talking about testosterone. And so if your testosterone is low, ideally the hypothalamus pituitary will send a signal to the testes saying, hey, we need some more testosterone, let's get going here. On the other hand, if it senses too much or an adequate amount of testosterone, that the hypothalamus pituitary will respond by saying, we're good on testosterone, you can cut it down a little bit, or just, or pull back a little bit on testosterone production. So what do you think happens if we're taking a testosterone cream and putting that free testosterone into the blood? The hypothalamus pituitary is going to sense that excess exogenous testosterone, in other words, the testosterone cream, and send a signal to the gonad saying, we're good on testosterone, stop making it. But of course that's not true, because we're not making enough testosterone, we're just putting, excess testosterone into the system. And so really you're trading your body's own ability to make testosterone for any number of reasons that we talked about with some exogenous, most of the time, synthetic testosterone. And it's just allowing these underlying causes to keep going and going and going, the inflammation, the insulin resistance, the leptin resistance, the fat gain, the cholesterol issues, and on and on and on. And I could go on for days talking about all these different hormones, giving all these different examples, but the big picture, the underlying, the takeaway here is we've really got to take a step back and look at the whole system, look at the whole body, and say what's really going on here. That's going to be it for this series. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.